Hello dear friends, and welcome back. Tonight I invite you to sit with me for a story that will touch your heart. Some stories make us smile, others make us think. But once in a while a story comes along that reminds us of the power of kindness and compassion. This is one of those stories. So wherever you are, relax, take a deep breath and let's walk into this moment together. The rain was falling in hard, slanted sheets against the windshield of Adrian Cole's black Mercedes as he pulled into the quiet suburban street. The billionaire CEO had taken this route countless times before, never expecting anything unusual. But tonight, the headlights cut through the storm and froze on a sight that made him slam the brakes. There, just beyond the iron gates of an old brick townhouse, stood a young woman, barefoot, trembling, dressed in nothing but a thin towel clutched around her. Her wet hair clung to her cheeks. The towel was soaked, nearly slipping from her shaking hands. Adrian's heart stopped. It wasn't just any woman, it was his maid, Elena. She had always been the quiet one in his mansion, efficient, polite, invisible in the way the world often forced people like her to be. But now, in the middle of the street, under pouring rain, she looked nothing like the composed figure who served tea and ironed his suits. She looked shattered. For a moment, Adrian could only stare, torn between disbelief and worry. What had happened to her? Why was she outside like this, with no shoes, no coat, nothing but humiliation covering her skin? And why, he wondered, did her eyes carry so much pain? If you saw someone you trusted in such a vulnerable state, what would you do? Would you stop to help, or drive past, pretending not to see? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Adrian Cole wasn't the kind of man who usually noticed the small details of life. Billionaires rarely did. His days were often measured by contracts, meetings, and the endless rush of numbers that defined his empire. Yet behind the walls of his vast mansion, Elena had been a quiet, steady presence for nearly 3 years. She was never late, never complained, never asked for more than her salary. Her steps were light, her voice softer still, as if she had learned long ago that the world rewarded silence more than truth. Adrian respected her work, but had never really thought about her life beyond his estate. Who she went home to, what dreams she carried, or what battles she fought when no one was watching. Those were questions he had never asked. That night, as he stood under the rain staring at her trembling form, all those unasked questions rushed to his mind. He pulled the car to the side, grabbed his coat, and hurried toward her. The storm seemed louder now, the kind that made the streets glisten like glass. Elena lifted her eyes and saw him, and for the briefest moment shame flickered across her face. She tried to turn away, clutching the towel tighter as though the rain itself were her enemy. "Elena," Adrian's voice cracked, his usual confidence stripped away. "What happened to you?" She shook her head, lips trembling but no words coming out. He wanted to press her, but something in her silence warned him that the story was heavier than the night could hold. Gently he draped his coat around her shoulders. The gesture made her break down, tears mingling with the rain as her knees almost gave way. He steadied her, leading her carefully toward the car. Adrian's world of luxury and control suddenly felt small in comparison to the mystery standing in front of him. He couldn't understand how someone who worked under his roof, someone he thought he knew, could end up abandoned on the street like this. That night was the first time he realized wealth couldn't shield him from heartbreak, not when it belonged to someone he cared about. Sometimes the people closest to us carry battles we never see. Do you think most of us take the time to really notice? Share your answer in the comments. The drive back to the mansion was heavy with silence. Adrian kept glancing at Elena through the corner of his eye, afraid that if he spoke too quickly, she might close herself off completely. The sound of the rain on the car roof became the only rhythm between them, a steady reminder of how fragile the moment was. She sat curled into the corner of the leather seat, his coat wrapped tightly around her, her hands clutching it as though it were a lifeline. The towel beneath was still damp, and her bare feet rested awkwardly against the carpet, leaving faint water stains. When they reached the long driveway leading to his estate, Adrian stopped the car, turning slightly toward her. "You don't have to explain anything right now," he said softly, "but I can't just pretend I didn't see you like that. At least, let me know you're safe." Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she shook her head quickly, tears welling up again. Finally, with a voice so faint it was nearly drowned out by the storm outside, she whispered, "I was thrown out." Adrian frowned. "Thrown out? By who?" Her hands tightened around the coat. "The people I live with. They didn't want me there anymore. They locked the door." She paused, swallowing hard. They didn't even let me take my clothes." The words hit him like a blow. For a moment he was too stunned to respond. Elena, who had always been the picture of dignity and composure within his home, had been tossed out like nothing. He parked the car inside the garage, turned off the engine, and sat in silence, staring at the steering wheel as his mind wrestled with what he'd just heard. "You mean to tell me," he finally said slowly, "that someone forced you into the street with nothing but a towel?" "It doesn't matter," she whispered, almost as though she wanted to make herself smaller. "I'll figure something out." But to Adrian, it did matter, more than anything had in a long time. Have you ever met someone who tried to hide their pain because they didn't want to be a burden? How did it make you feel? Share your experience in the comments below. Adrian led Elena into the warmth of the mansion, guiding her gently through the wide hallway lit by golden lamps. The storm still pounded outside, but in here silence held the air. She hesitated at the door, as though she didn't belong, but he reassured her with a small nod. "Sit here," he said, pulling out a chair near the fireplace. "You need to warm up." She lowered herself carefully, keeping his coat wrapped around her like a shield. The firelight revealed the bruised redness of her hands, her trembling fingers, the way she avoided his eyes, as though afraid of what he might see in them. Adrian disappeared into another room and returned with a folded blanket and a steaming cup of tea. She took them silently, her lips pressing against the rim of the cup, her eyes closing for just a moment, as if the warmth itself was a kind of relief she hadn't felt in years. He sat across from her, leaning forward. "Elena," he said gently, "you've worked in my house for years. You've never once asked me for anything, but tonight, you can't expect me to just sit back. Something's wrong, and it's more than being thrown out." Her shoulders stiffened. She stared into the fire, the reflection dancing in her wet eyes. For a long moment she said nothing. Then slowly she whispered, "It's not the first time." Adrian's heart sank. "What do you mean?" "They've done this before," she admitted, her voice breaking. "It's how they punish me when they feel I've done something wrong. Sometimes it's shouting, sometimes it's worse. Tonight it was this." She clutched the blanket tighter. "I usually just go back when they calm down." Adrian sat back, the words twisting inside him. He had spent his life in boardrooms and towers, insulated from cruelty like this. Yet here was someone under his own roof, living with torment that had gone unseen. He wanted to demand names, to storm into the night and make it stop, but something in Elena's trembling warned him to move carefully. She had lived in silence for a reason. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked softly. She looked up then, her voice barely audible. "Because men like you don't care about women like me." The words cut deeper than he expected. For once, Adrian didn't know what to say. "Do you think most people would have the courage to reveal their pain if they knew someone would truly listen? Tell me in the comments below." The fire crackled softly, filling the silence between them. Adrian had never been a man short of words, but tonight he found himself choosing them carefully, afraid that the wrong one might push Elena back into her shell. "You think I don't care?" he asked, his tone quiet but firm. "You've worked in my home, Elena. I see how you carry yourself, how you work without complaint. I may not have asked about your life outside those walls, but don't ever think I don't care." Her eyes shimmered as though she wanted to believe him, but years of disappointment had built a fortress inside her. She shifted her gaze back to the fire, her lips pressed tight. Adrian leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Tell me the truth. Who are these people who treat you this way?" Elena's breath trembled as she answered, "My own family." The words hit him like a thunderclap. He had expected landlords, cruel neighbors, maybe strangers, but not this, she continued, her voice breaking. "After my parents died, I moved in with my aunt. She promised to take care of me. But instead, she saw me as free labor, someone who owed her for every meal, every night under her roof. When I got the job in your house, she started taking most of my pay. She said I was nothing without her, that I'd always be a burden." Adrian's chest tightened. For all his wealth and power, he had no defense against the raw pain in her confession. Elena's hands gripped the blanket. "Tonight, she said I embarrassed her because I came home late. She told me to get out. She dragged me to the door before I could even change my clothes. I begged her not to, but she slammed it shut and locked it." Her voice faltered, her face burning with shame. "That's how you found me." Adrian sat back, speechless. The image of her standing in the rain wasn't just humiliation, it was betrayal of the cruelest kind. For the first time in years, he felt tears prick the back of his eyes. Not for himself, but for the woman who had quietly endured more than anyone should. The fire had burned lower, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Elena sat still, her face hidden in the folds of the blanket, as though she wished she could disappear inside it. Adrian watched her quietly, torn between anger at those who hurt her and helplessness at the depth of her wounds. "I don't understand how they could do this to you," he whispered, almost to himself. "Family is supposed to protect you." Elena gave a bitter laugh, though it held no joy. Not all families protect, some destroy. She finally lifted her eyes to his, and in them he saw something far heavier than tonight's storm. Years of swallowed pain, of nights spent crying into pillows no one knew about, of dreams crushed before they could bloom. "I've spent my whole life trying to be useful," she said softly. "If I worked hard enough, maybe they would love me. If I stayed quiet, maybe they'd let me stay. But it was never enough. Nothing I did was ever enough." Her voice cracked, and she pressed her fist against her mouth to stop the sob that rose from her chest. Adrian's throat tightened. In boardrooms he was a man of steel, a negotiator who never bent, but here, sitting across from Elena, he felt powerless. His money, his influence, his empire, none of it could rewrite the years of cruelty etched into her heart. "Maybe you should have left them long ago," he murmured, but even as he said it, he knew it wasn't that simple. "I had nowhere else to go," Elena replied, her eyes glistening, "and I couldn't risk losing the little I had. I have people depending on me." She stopped herself quickly, biting down on her lip as if she had revealed too much. "People? What people?" But Elena shook her head, retreating into silence again, her body folding inward like a flower closing at night. The room grew heavy with unspoken words. Adrian leaned back, his chest aching in a way he hadn't felt since he was a boy. He realized painfully that he was witnessing not just a maid's humiliation, but a soul crushed under the weight of secrets she had carried alone for far too long. For the first time in his adult life, Adrian Cole felt utterly lost. "Do you believe silence protects us, or does it only deepen the wounds we carry?" Share your feelings in the comments below. The storm outside had quieted, leaving only the steady patter of raindrops against the tall windows. The air in the room felt softer, but Elena's silence still hung like a fragile thread between them. Adrian rose slowly from his chair, crossing the room with uncharacteristic hesitation. He wasn't a man used to comforting words. His world had always been sharp edges, firm decisions and contracts signed in ink. But tonight called for something else, something he wasn't sure he had but was willing to try. He crouched beside her chair so they were level. "Elena," he said gently, "I can't change your past, but I can promise you one thing. You'll never be alone in this house again. Not like that. Not ever." Her lips trembled, and she shook her head faintly. "People make promises when they feel sorry, but they don't last." He took a breath. "This isn't pity. I've watched you for years, how you move quietly, how you give more than you're asked, how you carry yourself with dignity no matter what. That isn't weakness, Elena. That's strength, and I should have seen it sooner." Her eyes flickered, startled by his words. It was as if no one had ever spoken to her like that before. No one had ever recognized the quiet resilience she had built brick by brick inside her heart. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but this time, they weren't only from pain. They carried something else. Relief, maybe even a glimmer of release. She wiped her face with the edge of the blanket, and in a voice steadier than before, she whispered, "There are 2 children, my younger brother and sister. They don't live with me. I send them almost everything I earn so they can stay in school. That's why I endure it all, because if I don't, they have nothing." The truth unfolded before him like a door opening. She wasn't just surviving cruelty for herself. She was sacrificing her freedom so 2 children could have a chance at life. Something shifted in him then. This wasn't just about helping an employee anymore. This was about protecting someone who had been protecting others all along. He reached out, his hand resting lightly over hers. "Then from this moment on, you won't be fighting alone. We'll make sure they're safe. We'll make sure you are safe." For the first time that night, Elena didn't argue. She only nodded slowly, as if a tiny seed of hope had finally been planted inside her heart. Do you believe small acts of kindness can plant hope even in someone who has almost given up? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Morning light filtered through the tall windows, soft and golden, as if the world itself had decided to give Elena a gentler beginning. She sat quietly at the dining table, dressed in a fresh set of clothes Adrian had asked the housekeeper to bring. Her hair was still damp from the shower, brushed neatly behind her shoulders, but her eyes held the weariness of someone who had spent years carrying storms within. Adrian entered the room, his usual sharp suit replaced with something simpler. He poured himself coffee, but didn't sit right away. Instead, he leaned against the table, studying her carefully. "Elena," he began, his voice steady, "I made some calls this morning." She looked up nervously, clutching her cup tighter. "Calls?" "Yes, to my lawyer, and to the school your brother and sister attend." His gaze softened. "They're behind on fees, aren't they?" Her breath caught. How do you know that?" He smiled faintly. "Because you've been quietly sending money you barely have, and still it's not enough. I asked the school director. Don't worry, your siblings are fine. Their tuition has been paid in full. They'll stay in school." Her hands trembled around the cup, and the tears that gathered in her eyes this time were not from shame, but disbelief. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." Adrian's voice was firm but warm. "You've carried the weight of 3 lives on your own shoulders for too long. That ends now. You are not alone anymore." Elena set the cup down, unable to stop the sob that broke free. She covered her face with her hands, and Adrian, moved by something deeper than duty, came around the table and knelt beside her. "I'll make sure you're safe," he whispered. "Not because you work for me, but because no one deserves what you've endured, and because I see you, Elena. I see the strength, the sacrifice, the heart you've hidden all these years." Her tears fell freely now, her hands shaking as she lowered them, revealing a broken smile. In that moment, Adrian felt his own eyes sting. For all his wealth, for all the skyscrapers that bore his name, nothing had ever touched him like the quiet gratitude shining through her tears. And then, as though releasing years of pain all at once, she leaned forward and let herself cry against his shoulder. Adrian closed his eyes and held her, his own tears slipping silently down his face. In the stillness of that morning, a billionaire and a maid wept together, not as employer and servant, but as 2 souls who had finally found what they both needed most: compassion. Days passed, and the storm that had once soaked Elena to the bone slowly became a distant memory. The mansion, which once felt like a place of work and silence, began to feel like a refuge she had never known. For the first time in years, she slept through the night without fear of being dragged from her bed. Adrian kept his word. He didn't treat her with pity, but with quiet respect. He arranged safe housing for her siblings near their school, and set up a trust that would secure their future. When Elena protested, saying she didn't want charity, he answered simply, "This isn't charity, it's justice for everything you've endured." Elena began to change, though gently, like the first buds of spring after a long winter. She smiled more often, laughed softly when the younger staff shared jokes, and sometimes even allowed herself to sit by the garden pond in the evenings, watching the reflection of the stars ripple across the water. Adrian, too, found himself transformed. For years his life had been a race for more deals, more power, more recognition. Yet in helping Elena and her family, he discovered a wealth far greater than the numbers in his bank account. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of gold, Adrian and Elena stood on the balcony overlooking the estate gardens. The air smelled faintly of jasmine, and for once there was no rush, no weight pressing on either of them. "You've given me back more than you know," she said quietly, her eyes shining in the fading light. "I thought I was invisible, but you saw me. That's something I'll never forget." Adrian looked at her with a softness few had ever witnessed from him. "And you've reminded me that the greatest riches I'll ever have aren't in steel towers or gold. They're in moments like this, in people like you." For a long moment they simply stood together in silence, the world around them slowing to a gentle hush. The man who once measured his life by profits had discovered the priceless gift of compassion. The woman who once thought she was nothing had been shown her true worth. And in that quiet balance they both found something rare: peace. Sometimes life puts people in our path not by accident, but because we need each other to heal. Do you believe every encounter has a purpose? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story touched your heart today, don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of kindness.